Joining me now for more of all this, CNN's Will Ripley standing by in Seoul, Matt Rivers in Beijing, and the Executive Director of the Ploughshares Fund, Philip Yoon, also with us there in San Francisco. But Will, first to you, this was an ominous warning from the US President. There also seemed to be an indication he was moving towards some kind of military action here, that maybe diplomacy was off the table. And also at the same time, we're learning Pyongyang might be planning their own message for the United States with an upcoming military parade.
Right, John, all indications here on the Korean Peninsula right now, this is a situation that appears to be going downhill rather quickly. I have confirmed within the last couple of hours, speaking with diplomatic sources, that North Korea will be staging a massive show of force at what's expected to be a large military parade coming up on February the 8th. You're talking about hundreds of missiles and rockets, including many dozens, I'm told, of the Hwasong-15 intercontinental ballistic missile that North Korea recently tested. Now, it's unclear if all of these missiles are deployable or if some might be mock-ups. Obviously, in parades, they often use mock-ups, not live missiles, for safety reasons. But to have hundreds of missiles rolling through the streets of Pyongyang, in the words of one of my sources, this is designed to, quote, scare the hell out of the Americans. At the same time, we've also learned today that all foreign press are being banned from coverage of this parade. Initially, we had thought that a number of news organizations, including CNN, would be invited in to cover this. Now we've been told that we are not going to be going into the country. A source is telling me that this may be an attempt by North Korea to control the imagery that the world sees and also to avoid any potential questions about the viability of these missiles. And this does not bode well, given that this will be occurring on the eve of the Winter Olympics. North Korea has already canceled a scheduled inter-Korean cultural performance that was supposed to take place. They've expressed anger about the tone of the media coverage here in South Korea and have sent a number of warnings indicating that perhaps other inter-Korean partnerships around the Olympics could be now in jeopardy as a result of all of this. Also, sources not ruling out, John, the possibility of another North Korean missile test in the very near future, possibly to send a message to the United States, which of course has a large number of naval and strategic forces assembled around the Korean Peninsula.
Will, thank you. Of course, that raises the question, how much did the US President know before he delivered that State of the Union address, and how much that may have influenced what he said just a few hours ago. Matt Rivers, to you in Beijing, the one success the Trump administration has been able to point to has been China tightening the diplomatic screws on North Korea. Given the rhetoric that we heard from the US President now, which seems to be all military action, not a lot of diplomacy, would Beijing be asking, what's the point?
Well, anytime that you hear this kind of rhetoric from the president, that's something the Chinese government are not happy about. They're very firm and consistent in their position that the only way forward here is through not only sanctions, but also through eventually diplomatic dialogue between specifically the United States and North Korea. But I think it's worth pointing out, John, that we have heard this kind of rhetoric from the United States president before. And this is something that Beijing has gotten used to. You remember what the president said over the summer. You remember what he said to the UN General Assembly. And so yet Beijing has continued to forge ahead with its stated goal of using sanctions and ultimately diplomacy to solve this crisis. So I don't think that this one speech from the State of the Union will cause the Chinese government to change course. What it will do, though, is reinforce the position of those within inside the Chinese government that they must have contingency plans in place, that they need to know how they're going to respond should the United States go ahead with some sort of limited strike or perhaps a confrontation even larger than that.
Matt, thank you. Matt Rivers there in Beijing. We appreciate that. Let's go to Philip now. Philip Yoon in San Francisco. Philip, you know, to Matt's point, we've heard this talk kind of before, but we haven't heard it from Donald Trump whilst delivering the State of the Union. We've heard similar talk if you go back to George W. Bush and the axis of evil and that kind of thing. So when you listen to this, what was your take?
Well, you know, my initial reaction was a lot of the rhetoric is, as you said, very similar to what has been said in the past. George Bush have said that. Barack Obama, you know, North Korea is a terrible regime. You've got to be very hard on them because it's justifiably so. There's something that actually makes me a little bit more worried now about the State of the Union, this one, because of the context. I don't know if you know, but Victor Cha, who is the ambassador designate, supposedly, from the United States to South Korea, there was a Post story that said he's no longer being considered for that position. He just wrote an op-ed that came out on Washington Post just a few hours ago, which basically said that a bloody nose strategy, in other words, a limited strike, is something that makes no sense at all. And he pushed very hard on that. And he said the fact that it has been reported, the fact that he disagreed with that strategy, the administration supposedly decided not to formally give his nomination. That says to me that they are actually considering the possibility of the use of force or a limited strike as part of their strategy here, and therefore the way that this the State of the Union was written could be a precursor, and I don't want to be too alarmist, but it was fairly ambiguous. It could be really the precursor to justifying this kind of military action, which does make me worried.
And you mentioned Victor Cha and that op-ed in the Washington Post. So here's some of it. If we believe that Kim is undeterrable without such a strike, how can we also believe that a strike will deter him from responding in kind? And if Kim is unpredictable, impulsive, and bordering on irrational, how can we control the escalation ladder, which is premised on an adversary's rational understanding of signals and deterrence? Essentially, he is saying that once you start, it gets out of control. And his opinion, is that there are other military options and other better options apart from this so-called bloody nose. You said that to you is an indication that they're considering this military option. Could you take it one step further? It seems that that's the only option they're considering when you look at the fact that Cha is no longer now heading to Seoul as ambassador and what we heard just a few hours ago.
Well, it makes me worried because we don't know who the envoy is going to be. And the envoy then obviously has to be able to say that with a straight face that if the president decides he wants to advance that option, that the ambassador, our envoy, would support that. Quite frankly, I'm not sure how many people you're going to find who know the Korean Peninsula are actually going to agree to that. For most of us, the use of military force is not an option. And we've really talked about this. One of the things that is not discussed is the fact that the idea of deterrence. The North Koreans are not crazy. They're not irrational. They know if they preemptively attack the United States, they would cease to exist. And so, therefore, the idea of us doing a preemptive attack because we think they're going to makes no sense at all. And the idea that we'd be willing to risk hundreds of thousands, not millions of lives, lives in Korea, South Korea, Japan, and possibly the United States, just makes this whole thing a little bit, it makes it reckless, quite frankly.
And terrifying, to be honest.
Terrifying, no, absolutely.
Yeah, Phil, good to see you.
Yes.
We'll leave it there. We'll catch up soon. Appreciate it. Thank you.